unlocking data-driven insights in industrial projects for safety and production. We're going to go through a few topics in here today, starting with brief introduction of John and I. We're going to talk about just the general industry landscape in terms of what does industrial project mean, where is the growth happening in the market right now, and then we're going to dive into our favorite topic of digital twin. And John's expertise is in that sector as well. And then we talk about the total cost of ownership and how the integrated approach to building is important. And we're going to talk about digital twin and safety and some Q&As at the end so that we can have, you can answer any of your questions that we have at the end of the webinar. This is getting recorded at this time, and we will be posting this on our website and on YouTube as well. John, so I've known you for a while, and I recently met you at Poco Groundbreak. That's one of the powers of all these events and networking events that we get to meet in. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience of working in the industry for so many years.
Yeah, thank you, and really thank you, Niran, for having me today, and your team for putting this all together. Hats off to them, tip of the hat. I know that this is a lot of work, and so really appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk with you. Really, my background spans about 30 years in the AECO community, and for those that don't know what AECO is, it's architecture, engineering, construction, and sometimes termed owner or operator. Sometimes you will actually even see it AECOO. So I've been in this business for about 30 years. I first started out as a drafter in the shipbuilding business of all places, and that was my first entrance to reality capture. Reality capture back then was a little bit different than the way it would be looked at now. It was pen, paper, and a tape measure, and go out and into that physical space, measure everything out from equipment to electrical lines to whatever, come back in and draft that all up, and then go back out again and remeasure everything that you'd missed the first time. So that's where I started at. Fast forward really quick, got into facilities, really interested in facilities, building out different types of facilities, everything from mission critical to commercial office space to shopping centers. Had a chance to really kind of also do a deeper dive into the government side for a while and understand how facilities work on that side, operations and maintenance, and really understand some of the pain points that exist out there in operations and maintenance. I think my aha moment for all of this culminated when I saw the use of BIM and how it could be used and leveraged back into operations. But I was seeing companies simply discard or put their electronic BIM models into a safe for it never to come back to life again. And I said, well, wait a minute, there's something more here that needs to happen. We've spent a great deal of money creating all this content so that we can put it into a shelf, never to be used again, and it becomes stale. How could that be used in operations? And so that's really where I got passionate about just technology in general and how it can be applied into operations and then back into design for future. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about some of those things. I'm now a technology consultant, so I help owners figure out what that transformation should look like. Gafcon Digital is software agnostic, so we take best of breed and integrate those things in and figure out what that tech stack looks like for the owner. So just excited to be here. Sorry, went on a little long there, Niran, but I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm gonna Yeah, I do want to talk more about the owner side, and you actually just touched upon it a little bit as well, right? Where we've seen that the owners have a significant stake in the business during from design, construction to operations, and we've seen a lot of owners that now have taken on that responsibility of understanding the whole process so they can benefit the whole life cycle can be operated better, right? Um, but the means and method sometimes, would there be a conflict between a GC's means and method and owner means and method in terms of how they would be able to have a better reality capture or what kinds of tools they would use for doing project management, or is there more conflict or is there more collaboration?
I'm actually really optimistic that we're seeing more collaboration now than we did 10 years ago. I think there used to be sort of this siloed approach. We are starting to see some of those barriers break down. It's not with everyone, and every company, every owner is in a different position. But we are starting to see more collaboration. The tools that are out there and the data that's being collected is so useful beyond just, say a construction project, moving that into operations, using those types of data sets for time capsule purposes, for example, but starting to reimagining what that data transfer should look like, building those digital threads that allow that data to transfer from start to finish easier is an importance, but also talking about the contracts that are put in place. How shall that data be delivered? How shall it be formatted? How are we going to put that all together into a common data environment so that it can be shared beyond the life cycle of that project, right? Construction is what, maybe 12 months, and another how long for design, 9 to 12 months. And then we have an operations team that has got to live with that building for the next 40 years.
Yeah,
That data, that data is critical, and having it relevant, formatted in the right way so that it can be useful for operations can be invaluable.
100%. Yeah. And we've talked about this before, but along my career, I've also seen that there are there are contractual, you know, conflicts that prevents people from sharing the data with the other stakeholders. Right? And and I think that has probably slowed down a little bit, and I think that it might be more becoming more collaborative. But I can see that a BIM model is built by an architect, and then a BIM model is built repeatedly again built by the GC and the sub, and then there is an as-built model built, and the owner ultimately has to pay for all these three things. And I've also seen this happening in reality capture, where GC has its own reality capture team, and then the owner has its own reality capture team. Now, it's probably good for businesses because the business is getting money from multiple directions, and everybody is using the same, getting the same value out of different tools. But the owner is now paying double or triple for the same output, right? Um, would that change in the future, you think?
I don't think it's going to change a lot because and I don't say that because it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. If we're using reality capture during the project progress, during construction at the beginning, we're basically making a snapshot, a time capsule, so to speak, of each of those scans. If we format that right and we've geolocated it the right way and we've got control on it, then we can overlay that on top of the next layer of scans. We can start to do analysis on that to say what's changed from scan one to scan two. Obviously oversimplifying this process, but if you start to do that, you can layer that together into a time capsule, so to speak, so that you can understand when you get back into operations how that was built, what's behind the walls, what's above the ceiling, what's below the floor, what was out in your site. So if you've got to go out and build onto a new building, what kind of infrastructure might you need to worry about? How's that going to play into your next design? The other piece of it is For an owner, just having that reality capture for an as-built or an existing condition survey at the end of the project is critically important. Imagine having those items in place so that the operations team can go back, look at what's above that ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Without having to ever go out and tear a tile out. And put someone in harm's way climbing up a 12-foot ladder to remove ceiling tile so that you can see what's up there. Still going to have to do that, but how do you minimize that as much as possible? Technologies like reality capture can certainly make that much easier.
Yeah, I want to also maybe introduce our attendees about what would be a definition of a digital twin, because I think that uh, as as we've grown in the industry right now, the digital twin has become a pretty powerful tool. And with the whole evolution of AI, and I've seen big players like from Amazon to like AWS has their own digital twin platform, and Azure has their own digital platform. Do you want to tell everybody what a digital twins like a generic definition would be?
Yeah, what is it?
You want to try it?
Yeah, well, I will tell you exactly what it is. Digital twin is really a digital representation of the physical thing. If you look back in time at the infancy of what a digital twin was, it was really used by NASA to take really tough telemetry data on deployment of satellites or spacecraft to understand visually what was happening with the spacecraft at that instance in time. So if we apply that to, say, cars, if you've been in a modern car, a digital twin is probably on your dashboard. If you've been in a Tesla or any other car, I'm not recommending cars, by the way. It's just that you would have that digital representation on your dashboard. If you push the brake pedal, the brake light comes on, you turn the headlights on, the headlight comes on. It'll even tell you through telemetry where your cars are at in surrounding your vehicle, right? That's a digital twin. And the way they're able to make a digital twin successful is because they're building one car with consistent supplier pieces that are all connected, and they're programming that maybe once and then doing software updates on top of that. Now, if we apply that to the built environment, so say let's apply it to a building, we have all sorts of very interesting things that are happening with buildings. They're almost in some ways like snowflakes to some degree, in that we don't have common talking protocols for all of it quite yet. We've got the IoT piece of it, and you're starting to see AWS and Azure build those bridges to allow that connectivity to happen. And there's a lot of legacy vendors out there that are already doing a lot of that stuff, but not in the visual way, so to speak. So it's a little bit tougher. And so that programming has to be a little bit off. But at the end of the day, a digital twin is really the same thing. It's taking that graphical data, your asset data, and pulling those things together to build a representation to tell you what's going on with your building in real time. That's my short version of a
Yeah,
digital twin.
that's yes. I'm sure that our attendees and our listeners are able to kind of grasp that fully. Thanks for the explanation, John. Yeah, I think the digital twin right now has multiple components, including the real-time data collection using the IoT, because that's from point to point, it's a real time. And then the reality capture piece that basically gives that envelope of visualization is the second piece. And the third is that how do we use that data to visualize what's going on where, okay, let's say temperature is going high in one room or a worker is in a different zone. Like being able to see that in real time in a two-dimensional or three-dimensional way or a graphical format would be where we would put ourselves as a digital twin tool at this point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, John. So let's talk about some of the industry trends right now that are going, which is we've seen a massive increase in business and market opportunities in certain sector in our industry. And they're primarily focused around manufacturing, uh, data centers, roads, and like large airports because just the infrastructure that's required to sustain the growth in population. And we've seen other growth in residential and affordable housing, right? John, you've been looking in this market for a while. I mean, and I do wanna uh, get your insights upon some of these markets that you've seen happening. Yeah. So industry right now is about $1.8 trillion in the US. And we're talking about, $120 billion of EVs that are getting manufactured and data centers are getting built. So that would mean that, um, you know, there's going to be a massive amount of construction in these industrial sectors that are going to happen. Um, where do you see that growth coming from, and how does the digital twin fall into that process?
Well, firstly, I think that one of the things we have to recognize is our buildings are much more complicated now than they were, say, 20 years ago, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of um, being more energy efficient. There's more exotic equipment being employed in those buildings now. There's monitoring systems that are much more complicated than they used to be. I mean, think about the technology that has to exist within a building. I worked on a museum project where um, just the amount of IoT wireless access points that had to be put in that museum was astonishing, right? There's a whole new infrastructure that had to be built within that. I've worked on other projects where we're taking historical buildings that didn't have any air conditioning in them, for goodness sake, and now retrofitting those into that space, along with a massive network operation center. The amount of cabling that has to go into that and the amount of infrastructure that has to go into it really is leading our projects to be much more complicated. And really, that also introduced a lot of risk. And so, a lot of this technology, I think, is really inducing risk mitigation, right? We have VDC that occurs during the common course of a project, right? To make sure that we've managed how all those clashes are going to occur and how do we fix those before they go into fabrication. We're starting to see a lot of industries move to prefab, right? So multidisciplined racking systems that are being built off-site and installed. They bring them in on an 18-wheeler, for God's sake, and they wheel them up and they lift them into place, 20, 30 feet above the floor, and connect them all together with other kits. This really necessitates a technology to be infused into that, right? There's only one way to manage all these different things that are happening out in the field at once, and that's really being ahead of the curve and looking at these things with technology early on in the process. With a lot of growth happening in data centers, we're seeing just tremendous growth, and that's really being driven by AI at this point. The amount of compute that's needed is just incredible to do AI and machine learning and everything else that's being asked, by the community to have happen. So I'm very bullish on the amount of data centers that are going to continue to be built, and the power that we're going to need to generate to run them properly. And there's going to be more exotic ways for powering them coming down the pike. And that's very interesting, but it also is another complication that needs to be figured out. And these are folks that probably have not traditionally been part of the VDC process as we've known it. So bringing them into the fold and understanding those different trades that are going to be involved in some of these systems and building these buildings is going to be much more a collaborative effort, but it's also going to require some great tools to enable that collaboration to occur.
Yeah, and you actually are located in we call it the data center alley.
Yes, in the data center alley of the world. Yes, Ashburn, Virginia. Um, it's a home for about, I think it's 70% of all internet traffic travels through Ashburn. Over a gigawatt of power being used, with more coming online. And you're seeing that explosion of data centers all over the country because, well, let's face it, everyone wants to have their cat pictures, but they also want to generate some AI as well. And so there's a lot of uh, positive uh, things that are going to come out of the AI, but it also requires a lot of compute to make it happen. So
Yeah.
I don't see data centers going away anytime soon, and I'm really lucky to be part of that.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my early projects while I was working in New York City. And New York City has all these buildings that are like 40-story buildings, and they don't have the as-bills. Um, and my one of my first businesses I was doing, I used to do the laser scanning and BIM modeling. We used to call it scan to BIM. And the riser pipes in there was just the maze. And we were working in a tenant occupied building, so we had to figure out where the riser pipes are, and there was asbestos as well, and we had to make sure that none of that is disturbed. You know, uh, imagine building that now, like where we have all these tools that can have a location of all these riser pipes, and it would have saved so much time and money to the owner. And I think that the tools that we have right now are so powerful that it will be, the owners will basically save a lot of money with that understanding of where each of the building and each of the asset actually lie. Um, I do want to talk about some of the tools now, John, right?
Sure.
And I think that we've we've seen all these different tools where from design, BIM and design to project managers to project management tools to AR, VR tools, and down to all the tools for building operations that, you know, um, where do you see the space now has evolved from where it was and for all these different tools that you've seen come and go?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I've seen and I'm most excited about are probably AR, VR. I'm super bullish on what's happening in that space right now. Not not even adding Apple into the mix with their new headset. There's some really great headsets out there now that are doing some amazing things that I wish I had 10 years ago when I started playing around with this stuff. A former colleague of mine and my director at the time had gotten us a HoloLens 1, very much prototype. We were super enthusiastic, went down into a new building foundation that was being built 30 feet underground and started to try the headset on. One of the things that I was most amazed by was I now had a visual understanding of what was happening in the field. We let one of the construction workers, a concrete framer who was building foundations for the building. We let him try the headset on, and he had this grin come across his face. It was like a kid in a candy store, the first time he'd ever seen it. He articulated back to us all the things that he was seeing in there that he hadn't realized were part of the features of what he was actually contributing to build. And that were some footings that had some dips in them and things like that that were needed for the plumbing. But he hadn't seen that on the plans. We spent an awful lot of time dreaming in 3D as architects, and then going and putting all that down into 2D so we can model it in 3D so that we can print it out in 2D so we can give it to the guy out in the field in 2D so that he can build it in 3D and then do as-built in 2D so that we can give them back as record models and record drawings to the owner as 2D when they're managing a 3D building. I mean, as my former director told me, he said we spend an awful lot of time going from 2D to 3D back to 2D to 3D. That's a huge waste, and there's a lot of information loss that occurs during that. If we can stay in 3D to begin with, then that's great. AR, VR gives us that ability to visualize in 3D. Yeah, maybe we still have to look at the 2D drawings, and maybe we do have to use those because they are legal documents. but we can cut through the imagination of reinterpreting those 2D drawings into 3D by using the headsets in a different way. I think there's a lot of value in that, in cutting down that time to understand what it is we have to build in 3D. So I'm very bullish on what's happening in the AR VR world, XR as well. There's just some really, I think we're really at the beginning of it. A lot of the real big challenges have been figured out, like, spatially laying out things, setting up control, having models that don't drift when you have a headset on. A lot of those things are being figured out. And then on the hardware side, the costs are coming down. So a piece of equipment is less expensive now. And some of them, frankly, they run on iPads. So, we already have those in the field, right? If you're using, Procore or BIM 360 or ACC, whatever, you've already got a tablet out in the field. You're already using it. So it's not a hard lift to go to that next place and use AR for that stuff. I'm very excited about what's happening with robotics as well, um, because those things are actually translations of what we're doing in BIM. If you look at some of the things that, say, Dusty Robotics has been doing with robotic layout, for instance, it's all coming from the BIM model in a lot of cases, and then it's revalidated back into that system. So we're getting better as builds. We can start to use reality capture and robotics and automation on that. I'm very excited about where that's headed over the next couple of years.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that we've come across from a phase where BIM was being used as a marketing tool or as a tool for doing class detections to now finally like using it for real production, real layouts, and to do as builds like it. And I think it's a very interesting phase where we've seen the evolution of so many of these tools that now is reaching a point of full adoption, right? Um,
Yeah,
and
you really are, and one of the things that I think is a misnomer is that in the construction world, a lot of fabrication teams are using BIM heavily, and they're using robotics to actually build spool systems together to create the piping that you see out in a data center, for instance. It's being generated off of that BIM model through a process for manufacturing. It shows up on an 18-wheeler, and there's nothing more humbling than seeing the work where you've been doing virtual coordination on a project and seeing that exact piece in real time on the back of an 18-wheeler being lifted into place and fitting perfectly the first time. That's the incredible piece, and that's the power that BIM is bringing um, to the built environment, in my opinion. So why not use it for operations?
yeah, I think that it used to be that construction industry was the last to adopt technologies. We were hearing until last couple of years ago, but suddenly I feel like we're at the point where we are kind of leading some of these new adoption of technology, especially with like HoloLens. I'm sure HoloLens is being used in defense, but HoloLens has found a home in construction, right? We've seen, different kinds of tools being used, being pioneered in construction. So that means that our industry is definitely evolving to in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And there's just the HoloLens and the HoloLens 2 really were the precursors to sparking a whole new segment, in my opinion. There were a lot of things to overcome. There's a lot of technology that had to be figured out just to, frankly, make it all work. And that has given rise to some of these new manufacturers that are taking it to the next level. It's really interesting to see, and I'm very bullish on what may come next. Who knows? Will there be a HoloLens 3? I kind of hope so. I want to see that continuation and that challenging of the market, because I think that at the end of the day, there's opportunities there to really transform how we both design, but also construct and then operate our buildings.
Yeah, cool. John, you want to talk a little bit more about just the operational side of tools that are being used, like how is the data being transferred from during the building to now the operation side?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're starting to see our owners pay more attention to is the common data environment. So what is a common data environment? You obviously have captured a couple of them here. I think probably one of the more popular ones is both Procore and Autodesk's BIM 360, now ACC, where you bring different disparate pieces of data together into one common data environment. You start to then add integrations like Kwant into that system, right? So we now have that hub, so to speak, where we can take all this data and bring it together and start to look at it almost as a mosaic. It doesn't that individual tile doesn't make a lot of sense, but when you start to arrange all those tiles together into that mosaic, you get a full picture of what's going on. And I want to kind of go back a little bit to our earlier discussion and build off of this is that we don't look at building value from we look at it from a physical standpoint, right? So let's also look at it from the virtual standpoint, the electronic standpoint. Is there value in having good record keeping, reality capture plans that tell you how things were built? When does that change the value of that property, that building? Wouldn't it inherently be worth more if you had all that data together into one common data environment so that you could share that with the next owner? Inherently, it's like I have a collector car and I've got all the records on how it was maintained through its entire life. Those things are valuable to someone who may be purchasing that car later, right? So why aren't we doing that the same way with buildings? So we understand, hey, how was it maintained? Were things maintained properly? Doesn't that bring more value to that building inherently because you know it's been well cared for, taken care of, and was built properly?
Yeah. And I think we
So
can
that, go
talk
ahead.
about the whole uh, total cost of ownership, where we're not looking at a building from just like how much it costs to build, but overall like how much it costs to like run this building every year, and how do we bring that down? And I think, especially in data centers where there is such a huge investment, and every minute lost can cause, every minute a data center would be down, probably would cost millions of dollars of loss, actually, right? So I think that they really have to look into the total cost of ownership and how to make it sustainable and how to bring efficiency into the whole operation thing is so important. Um, Meanwhile, as we're talking about the operations, there is a lot of we work with a lot of manufacturing companies that are or prefab companies that are using Quant on not just the understanding of like how they're building on the job site, but also how they're actually manufacturing this on the factory. How each pod is, what is the production um, cycle of each pod, and how can we use continuous learning to improve the cycle time, and just on the workflow management there. And there's a lot of tools that I think we've seen come up, also trying to understand the efficiency of the tools as well as the machineries so that they can align together with the workers' production cycles. And I think prefab is such a game changer recently, especially also in the data center, because we work with a few companies who both on the factory um, as the job site where they were just transporting the entire panels. And I think they were saying like about 60% of the data center is actually getting manufactured in the plant and then being transported, right? Now this has a lot of impacts in terms of cost, safety. You want to touch upon some of them, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think of prefabrication as being an enabler for more safety, right? So if you have multi-discipline racking that's lifted in place using, hoists and cranes and things like that, where someone's not, at high heights up installing something, one piece at a time, you're certainly mitigating a lot of safety risks there, where they're just connecting things together rather than building the whole thing, 30 feet up in the air. I think there's huge value in safety from that perspective. And you start to think about looking at how we use reality capture and camera systems to be able to identify safety issues that may be occurring, being able to look at logistics, looking at how things are being put together, and being able to start to infuse those into the discussion with all the stakeholders. I've seen instances where a foundation wasn't poured the right way. A piece of precast shows up on the site. They've got to tear that foundation out and redo it so that it matches up, so it works right. How'd that happen? Who knows? But, using reality capture, you're able to capture that early. That team member was able to, flag that and look at it as an issue. They were able to go out and correct that well before the precast ever showed up on site. Those are the types of efficiencies that help keep the construction project moving along. But more importantly, you're not putting people at risk, at the 11th hour to go jackhammer out a foundation so that they can re-pour it in place so that they can get it done. They're not under the gun, which, when you're under that kind of pressure, you can start to induce safety hazards into that, just cutting corners or not thinking things through or working long hours. Those are the types of things that we can use technology to kind of mitigate, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Yeah, and I think even from a risk perspective or insurance perspective, having like certain percentages of the work being done on a factory versus a job site, I'm sure the risks are lower because your total hours on a site are getting lower. So, and I think the worker comp side is highly dependent upon the total hours spent on the job site. So you're getting a better rate on the insurance as well.
Oh, right, absolutely. The other thing is that you're also coordinating a lot of that stuff beforehand. The environment is much easier. You're not working on top of each other. You're not doing layout on top of each other. The logistics piece of it, it's just a cleaner site, right? So there are all
Yeah,
those things that factor into it if it's
yeah,
well.
we're working with a prefab manufacturer. I think they're building the largest prefab hospital in North America, and they're able to do this within like one third of the construction time, I think, and they manufacture the entire thing on the site on the plant. They ship it floor by floor, and then they give it to the GC to get it installed. So it's I think that there's a lot of powerful benefits of this the new world of modular right now. And I guess like we always see this evolution happening where we've seen some failures in how the modular has been done, like with Gatera and Beep. But the ones that are really doing it the right way I know there are GCs that have a branch that is a focus on prefab, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um, and or there are electrical contractors that we work with that has now bought a prefab um, panel board companies, like then they're kind of doing all this work at the plant before they ship it. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of benefits to that. We also know a lot of actually hospitals that has mandated that 30% or the 40% of the work being performed on a plant or offsite, right? So do you see this demand coming from the owner as well, where the owner is asking for more offsite work?
Yeah, I think the owners are always looking to be able to trim that budget so that they can make that project successful, right? In a lot of the mission critical areas that we represent clients with, it's all about how fast can we get to market with a building? How fast can that facility be built? On a confined space, you have to start to look at, off-site construction and prefab. How do you make that all happen together? And you're seeing a lot of the industry leaders out there that are embracing that and we don't see that going away. We see more of it actually. Um, so I'm very bullish on what's going to happen over the next few years on that. How do we build them faster? How do we also document, carbon footprint as they're being built and operational efficiency? All these things kind of tie together, right? You know, um, and so I only see more of that coming down the pike.
Yeah, I think carbon efficiency is such a huge thing. And as all these data centers consuming the massive amount of energy to run AI models, um, I think it's on top of their mind to make sure that the heat that is being consumed, the heat that's being generated, and the cooling that is being used to cool these racks and colos is done sustainably. Right? And I think we'll see new technologies like quantum computing, like nuclear reactors that are actually going to help to optimize it. And I guess that's a new field of construction that is going to be coming up soon, just like EVs. Like we'll see the next generation of power generating tools or power supply tools, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really see is our buildings are going to continue to be complicated. They're not going to get any less complicated. And if anything, they're going to become more complicated. There's going to be other trades that are going to need to participate. You touched on some new compute coming down the pike. What's that going to look like in the next few years? How is that going to change the landscape? How is solar and nuclear and eventually fusion going to change the paradigm for how we power these data centers? We don't see the compute necessarily going away at this point. We only see it growing. Um, so how are we going to meet that demand over time? There's not going to be less demand. There's only going to be more demand at this point. So how do we start to tackle those things?
Yeah. Uh, John, we talk about, the digital twin tools, and we've seen a lot of these safety tools that are, how do we actually use digital twin to improve safety? And I think that's where Quant comes in, and we've seen a lot of these examples of being able to replicate what's happening on a job site in real time, so you can take actions proactively versus reactively. We consider building components as two. One is the physical component, which is how you're building the HVAC systems or your drywalls, and the second piece is who's building it, the workers that are actively participating in building this, like and and I know that Gafcon is definitely involved in a lot of this, construction process and operations. Actually, where do you see the labor and workforce coming into that picture of digital?
Well, I see it being as integral as anything else. One, for risk mitigation, two, understanding who's where, when, and what, but also more importantly is safety. And then on top of that is optimizing superintendent's time in the field, rather than punching time clocks and going through logs to make sure somebody's been on site or um, the right folks have been actually on site, such as safety training and things like that. Have they done all that stuff? Um, it frees the superintendent up to go do the other things that are necessary for project success, which is like, finding some of those issues that are out there that are bigger issues than just looking at logs all day long, right? It's optimizing our workforce so that they're more productive. And I look at it with the same as AI, right? We're simply making ourselves more productive and able to focus on the things that we really need to focus on. Um, I'm very excited about some of those things that are coming down the pike and some of the things that are available to us now to make um, our teams more productive, more accountable, and also safer.
Yeah, and I think in the security aspect of some of the data centers are so huge that being able to control just authorized access, right? And I think that's a lot of our GCs and owners that we work with have a really high focus on that piece. because of the sensitivity of the data that is being stored, or just the uptime they have to maintain there. And I think we've seen also a lot of owners being very focused on just worker motivation, worker health, the overall composition of the worker, diversity, as well as fatigue management. Like we've seen owners that are using our tools to understand that the same worker is not working for 12 hours, 5 days straight, and they're getting enough rest. That tomorrow they come back, they don't get hurt. And I think it's both sides, right? And I've seen that the tools being used to create value, create a better working environment and culture, and get a more secure um, job site and secure data center. And I think that that's a really powerful tool uh, that's that can be used. Talking about AI, we've seen this image was actually being created using AI, right? And our marketing does an amazing job at that, where I'm sure we're consuming a little bit of a power over there instead of using the power of our laptops. We asked, I think, GPT-4 to generate this image, which is a mix of AR on the right hand side, left hand side, and the VR on the right hand side. John, have you seen any digital twin for safety? Like I know that training, I know that people are using VR headset for that experience of you're gonna get hurt, be aware that that real feeling.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So first off, you can use BIM for safety. You can use reality capture for safety. There's tools out there now that you take that point cloud and you can turn it into a third person, um, almost like a video game. Allows you to walk the space. Why is that useful? Well, for instance, if I'm a safety person, I don't even have to get up, fly to that site to look at what's happening. There are safety things that could be fixed or mitigated in the field without ever having to go out to that site. We can walk that job and start to look at it. So from that standpoint, we see a lot of potential for safety and also training for that matter. How do we train remote workers to be able to understand, say, Bob decides he's going to go on vacation, and someone needs to understand how that building operates, and they're going to come in with someone as a backup. They can use that AR VR experience to guide them through the building, to shut off that valve, for instance. God forbid that have to happen, but that person could go on vacation and there's someone there that can run backup. The other piece of it I see is VR being used in the design process for safety, and security. For instance, we can start to look at camera locations, for instance, where they're at, replace those, move them where they need to be at, or how do we operate a valve in the mechanical room? Do we have to get up on a big ladder to get there? Can we move that valve in a place that makes it safer to put that ladder at instead of crawling over a piece of equipment to get to it? Those are the types of things that we're already seeing and using and employing in VR, to make amazing discoveries and fixes before we ever even get into construction, before we even get into the final designs and the design reviews. We can start to look at those types of things and flag them early. I'm very excited about what we can do with AR as well. And this has been around for a while, but now we have tools in terms of headsets that are less expensive, and software that's more capable of visualizing the whole model, that we can start to look at things like, how do we access that space above the ceiling after it's built. Using AR, we can look at that. We can look at that in the field right now in real time and say, hey, we need to make an adjustment here. We need to raise this as a question. We can find those things. So I'm really excited about what AR and VR can do for safety, but also for training, and also for future design. We can use that same model over and over again. As long as we're maintaining it in operations, we should be able to use that as it feeds back into the design for the repurposing of that space. A lot of value there.
Yeah, I think it's seemed like prefab. I think VR and AR has come of age, where we've seen the some of the players like just not making it through, and the real winners have kind of like finally emerged. The the technology also has evolved in a way. The battery life has become better. You don't need to charge the headsets again and again every hour, right? And the whole computing power has increased. And yeah, and I remember using Dacry helmet in a Autodesk University about a couple of years ago, and everybody from Rick Kahn to everybody was fans of like Dacry. And I think that that was such a big you know thing that at the time, and finally like we settled down in a place where even an iPad can do it, and now we have better overlay technologies, and uh, and I think as in every industry, sometimes the defense fund actually sometimes really helps to generate the speed of the process. I think Microsoft getting a massive this defense contract for the HoloLens helped them to really speed up some of the things that they wanted to do to get the field this HoloLens for field. So
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a lot of technological problems that had to be solved, and it's a serious investment to overcome those. And what I think you're starting to see now is the technology is matured, but the software is also matured. Our understanding of how to use it in the right time, in the right place for the right application is also starting to mature, and we're starting to see those use cases now and the value that they bring. Um, and I think that you're only going to see the cost continue to drop on both the hardware and the software side. Um, but that also is going to allow it to be more widely adopted. I'm really excited about some of the things I'm seeing with assisted reality. So just being able to bring up documents, for instance, when you're out in the field looking at a piece of equipment to understand how it works, or what the sequence of operations are, or what is the shut-off procedure, or connecting real time with a vendor or a manufacturer, or even just being able to be out in the field with your glasses on and be able to take a couple of pictures of that piece of equipment while you're on a ladder. Instead of reaching in to grab a camera, you can do it with a pair of goggles or glasses to accomplish the same thing. That way you're keeping both hands on the ladder, right? So those things I think really do feed into the safety. I think technology is really going to continue to help make us safer in the field.
yeah, yeah, I want to. Anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask right now. We only have a few minutes. As we wrap up, like we've seen the whole digital twin in the workforce area and how the assets are placed. This is a 2D version of how we represent that, and you can see like this is a high risk zone, so anybody enters there, somebody gets an alarm, and you can prevent an accident from happening, right? A lot of accident happens because somebody unauthorized is entering a zone, or somebody unauthorized is operating a vehicle, right? So having that interconnection between like okay, he doesn't have a permit to run this forklift, let's avoid that from happening. And I think that's where the other piece of digital twin comes in, where we're talking about tools, we're talking about equipment, we're talking about people, right? And being that connection between all of that together. So, and I think that the threat of IoT is so powerful in that, um, that you can have these bits of data that comes in through and can avoid a person from getting hurt, actually, right? And
It it really truly is fantastic, the ability to understand visually and see what's happening with the workforce in the field. You're right, those exclusion zones, a lot of the time where we've seen incidents as happen, or people going into spaces they weren't supposed to be in to begin with, or they didn't have the proper certifications or the training to be in those spaces, right?
yeah,
Or there's too many people in that space. And how do we reduce the number of people in there so that we're not creating opportunities for incidences to happen, right? It's all about risk mitigation. This also frees up the rest of the team that are running the project to go work on other things that are, frankly, probably going to be more impactful to the bottom line of the project, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I always say that, like, where like ChatGPT can free up 20-30% of the time, so we can now focus on high value work, you know, that ChatGPT cannot do at this point, right? So how do we now go and make sure that, you know, like the construction progress is being done properly? Like, how are we actually coordinating the drawings properly? Like, and I think there are things that now the supers are going to be freed up to do. And then we're really excited about how we can contribute to that. Lastly, like all that combined together, like, you will see a replication of how we are scoring each site or your portfolio of projects, so that this data can now be used to avoid risk before it happens. And I think that this is now the saving of time and money, leading to now, better insights and better way to now build finally that, we've been waiting for. And I think it's only happens because we're able to collect this data in real time with all these different tools that we've finally been able to figure out, or pass the information back to them, to the users, using this, like maybe AR, it's a ping on a VR headset or ping on an AR headset, that now it's saying like, look, hey, you can't go there, or there's a valve that has been leaking and you can see it in the model, and I can, let's go and shut it off, or there is an action that can trigger to shut that valve off immediately, so you can avoid water damage, right? And I think that there's such a powerful tools right now that are coming up to um, make help better save lives and save money, and all that is combination of the data collection, data visualization, digital twin, and actionable insights.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. We're finally at an inflection point where the computers can handle the vast amount of data, right? That it takes to run these systems, and then also visualize it in a meaningful way so that action could happen in a timely manner. I'm very excited about all the things that are emerging and coming down the pike.
Well, we're at the end now, and if anybody has questions, we've got a few minutes left. But I think it's been a great session, John. Um, we'll give it a few minutes for any questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up, and we'll share with everybody and all the anybody who registered via email, recording link of it, and so you can actually, anybody who missed it can actually go and listen to it again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Niran, for having me today, and your team for putting this all together, and for everyone taking the time to join us today. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, we're happy to reach out to us through email or LinkedIn, and looking forward to the next episode of Bits to Atoms. John, thank you so much.